Is above the law in the United States. That's a foundational principle.
Nobody is above the law in this country, and that includes the President of the United States.
I don't think the President is above the law. No person in this country, no matter how high or powerful, is above the law.
I believe that no one is above the law under our system, and that includes the President. The President is fully bound by the law, the Constitution, and statutes.
Just to be clear there, what he said there, Roberts, the authors of yesterday's decision, said fully bound by the law, the constitutions, and statutes. That's not what he wrote yesterday, because once upon a time, the authors of that immunity decision had a different view on whether a president is above the law, or at least that's what they said in their Senate confirmation hearings when they needed votes to become lifetime tenured justices. As constitutional scholar and Congressman Jamie Raskin pointed out yesterday, the Supreme Court took a bulldozer to the Democratic credo that no one, including presidents and former presidents, is above the law. Today's ruling is a radical break from the rule of law, which underscores how much our democratic values have been eroded and are on the line in November. Joining me now is Congressman Jamie Raskin, a Democrat of Maryland. He's the lead impeachment manager in Donald Trump's second impeachment. He is a constitutional scholar and law professor before he came to Congress. Congressman, I found that the reason we played that is just to show in some ways the enunciation of that principle by those individuals at their hearings, particularly John Roberts, saying the Constitution, law, and statutes. That's pablum, right? That's just like civic cliche for all of us. Like, we all know this, and yet they quite definitively broke with that in their opinion yesterday.
They did. I mean, you know, that was then and this is now. It's sort of like when they all swore fealty to Roe versus Wade as precedent and stare decisis and adhering to it. But, you know, what they would probably say is, well, yeah, the president is bound by the law, but the law itself treats the president in a completely different category from members of Congress, Supreme Court justices, and, you know, the ordinary rabble of the citizenry, which has to depend on basic constitutional rights. They've gotten rid of that. And there are people in Trump's circle who are openly talking about a post-constitutional America. This decision moves us to something much closer to a constitutional monarchy where, you know, the president, they say, within his core powers cannot be questioned and cannot be prosecuted. One of those is the pardon power. And so the immediate question that leaps to mind, especially for a guy like Donald Trump, is can he sell pardons? And that's just non-reviewable now because that's within his core powers. But when you look at what happened on January 6th, they're saying, well, when he dealt with the Department of Justice and tried to stage his mini coup over there, that's within his core power to run the executive branch, even though there is nothing in the 12th Amendment which says the president has anything to do with counting presidential votes or electoral college, just like with the vice president. They're saying, well, presumptively, whatever Trump did with Mike Pence was okay, except Mike Pence is operating as the president of the Senate under Article 1, not as an executive branch official. And again, the president has nothing to do under the 12th Amendment with the counting of electoral college votes, just like there was nothing official about telling people to go and fight like hell. And if you don't, you're not going to have a country anymore and stop the steal. What does that have to do with his public office? And yet he is shrouded now with this presumption of presidential immunity because we've got a bunch of monarchists sitting on the Supreme Court.
You highlighted the stakes of this election, which I think you and I share views about, and particularly in the wake of this. Have you spoken, as a member of Congress, have you spoken with anyone from the White House or the Biden campaign since the debate or since the decision?
No, I've not spoken to anybody from the White House. I've spoken to lots of members, of course, and I get tons of email and texts from my constituents and friends. But if you're talking about this decision, I'm sorry, Chris, if you were referring to this decision, I mean, there's great alarm in the country about this decision. I mean, it's hard to believe that the alarm could be heightened, but this one really shows a radical break from more than 2 centuries of understanding of the president's role. And it's as if they are trying to set the stage for Donald Trump's new monarchical presidency.
Yeah, and I think, part of what we've seen in the last few days, a lot of sort of debate and hand-wringing about the polling between the incumbent President Joe Biden and Donald Trump, the nominees of the two parties, worries about his ability to make that contrast clear to the American public. Your colleague Lloyd Doggett had this to say, which I want you to listen to, and then ask a question after. Take a listen.
I hope that he will put country first. I know Trump would never do that, but that he will put country first and decide to step aside, give us a fair, open, democratic with a small d convention and the lead up to that convention.
Do you agree with Congressman Doggett?
Well, look, we are the party of democracy and freedom right now, and everybody is asking one question within the Democratic Party. And I know that's true of President Biden and Vice President Harris and my friend Lloyd Doggett and everybody in the House and the Senate and all of the members of the Democratic Party, the tens of millions of people across the country, which is how do we defeat Donald Trump and how are we going to defeat the threat of authoritarianism and keep the progress of democracy and freedom moving forward in the country. And we are not operating like an authoritarian religious cult the way that the Republican Party operates now. There will be lots of discussion and lots of people weighing in. And I know this is a moving target. It's got to happen quickly. But I can guarantee you, Chris Hayes, there will be massive unity and focus on that task when we get to the end of this process. And it's happening very quickly, I think.
Do you, I'm going to ask you to be honest, you're a politician, I get that, but do you feel the bad feeling in the gut the way a lot of people feel the bad feeling in the gut after this last week?
I mean, we've taken some hits, but I always like to quote my dad who said when we were growing up, when everything looks hopeless, you're the hope. And I've been to 21 states now for President Biden and for the Democratic ticket up and down. And there's tremendous enthusiasm and commitment on the Democratic side to winning this election everywhere. And we have not yet begun to fight. And we're going to fight them in North Carolina and in Georgia and in Iowa and Michigan and Minnesota, in Texas, all over the country. We're going to fight them and we're going to win this campaign. I mean, there's just no alternative at this point.
All right, Congressman Jimmy Raskin, thanks for your time tonight. Appreciate it.
You bet.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.